New York City did not grow by adding land alone. It also grew by removing whole neighborhoods from memory. In the early years of the city, streets formed before plans, houses rose before laws, families settled before maps were finished. New York did not start as a clean design. It became a city through conflict, pressure, and choices that favored power. Many neighborhoods vanished through this process. They did not fade quietly. They were pushed aside. This begins with the idea that loss was not accidental. It was planned, argued over, approved, and enforced. In the 17th and 18th centuries, New York developed without a single guiding plan. Dutch settlers laid out New Amsterdam before 1664. The English renamed it New York after taking control. Streets followed old footpaths, property lines, and shoreline curves. Working people lived close to water, markets, and docks. Wealthier residents moved north as the city expanded. By the early 19th century, the city faced pressure. Population grew fast, immigration increased, commerce expanded. Disease spread through crowded areas. Fire destroyed wooden buildings. City leaders began to see older neighborhoods as problems to fix. The belief grew that progress required removal. This belief shaped policy. One of the earliest neighborhoods to disappear stood along the East River. This area included parts of present-day Lower Manhattan near Pearl Street and Water Street. In the late 1600s and early 1700s, this zone was filled with small homes, taverns, warehouses, and workshops. Many residents worked at the docks. Some were free black New Yorkers. Some were enslaved. Some were immigrants from the Caribbean, the Netherlands, and England. The shoreline changed through landfill projects. The city extended land into the river to support trade. Streets shifted. Homes vanished under new construction. Records from the early 1700s show property disputes as original residents lost access to water and space. This was not seen as destruction at the time. It was called improvement. City authority rested with a small group. Wealthy merchants and landowners held influence. Governors appointed under British rule approved major changes. After independence, elected officials continued similar policies. One key figure was Gouverneur Morris. He played a role in shaping early city planning ideas. Morris supported organized street layouts and believed disorder slowed progress. His views influenced later planners. Another influence came from merchants involved in port expansion. They funded landfill projects. They benefited from deeper docks and larger warehouses. The cost fell on residents with less power. The city did not hide these actions. Minutes from common council meetings show open debate. The voices of the poor were rarely recorded. The most important turning point came in 1811. The New York State Legislature approved the Commissioner's Plan. This plan imposed a grid across Manhattan north of Houston Street. It ignored hills, streams, farms, and existing settlements. 3 men led the plan. They were Gouverneur Morris, John Rutherford, and Simeon DeWitt. DeWitt served as Surveyor General of New York State. The plan aimed to create order. Streets would be straight, blocks would repeat, property could be divided and sold with ease. Growth would be controlled. What the plan did not do was protect existing neighborhoods. Small villages north of the settled city faced removal. These included places with names that no longer appear on maps. Greenwich Village existed before the grid. It began as a small hamlet known as Grinzik during Dutch rule. It later became a refuge during yellow fever outbreaks. People fled north to escape disease in Lower Manhattan. By the early 1800s, the village had winding streets and mixed communities. Free black residents lived there. Artisans worked from home. The village had its own identity. The grid cut through it. Streets were extended without regard to existing roads. Property lines shifted. Some homes were seized through eminent domain. Others lost value when streets changed. Greenwich Village survived, but only after losing much of its original form. Its survival was unusual. Many other settlements did not endure. Near present-day Foley Square stood an area called the Collect Pond. It was once a freshwater source. Nearby grew a working-class neighborhood with small houses and workshops. By the late 18th century, the pond became polluted. Tanneries dumped waste. Slaughterhouses drained blood. City leaders decided to fill the pond. The fill contained garbage and debris. The land sank. Buildings cracked. Disease spread. Residents left or were forced out. By the early 19th century, the neighborhood was gone. In its place came courts, prisons, and government buildings. The residents were not relocated together. Their community ended. Loss meant more than losing a home. It meant losing neighbors, support, and identity. Families depended on local networks. Jobs were close to homes. Churches and schools tied people together. When neighborhoods vanished, people scattered. Some moved north. Some left the city. Some entered crowded tenements. City records show rising complaints about housing after major removals. Reformers noted the connection between displacement and poverty. The city accepted this as a cost of growth. Many early lost neighborhoods left traces underground. Archaeological digs in Lower Manhattan have uncovered foundations, wells, and household items. These finds confirm written records. One example is the African burial ground. It was used from the late 1600s through the late 1700s. It lay outside the settled city at the time. As the city grew, it was built over. Its rediscovery centuries later showed how entire communities were erased from surface memory. At the time of burial ground closure, city leaders knew it existed. They allowed construction anyway. This was not ignorance. It was choice. By the 1820s, New York had a clear pattern. Growth favored trade, order, and profit. Neighborhoods without power faced removal. The grid made future removals easier. Streets could be extended at will. This set the stage for larger actions. Whole villages north of the city would face the same fate. Before trees were planted and paths were drawn, a living neighborhood stood where Central Park now rests. I am now going to tell the true story of Seneca Village. It was not empty land. It was not unused ground. It was a home. In the early 19th century, Manhattan ended far below today's Central Park. North of 59th Street lay rocky land, small farms, and scattered settlements. One of these settlements became Seneca Village. Seneca Village began in 1825. The land sat between what are now 82nd and 89th Streets from 7th Avenue to 8th Avenue. The land was owned by John and Elizabeth White, a white couple who divided and sold parcels. The buyers were mostly free black New Yorkers. At that time, owning property carried great meaning. New York law allowed only black men with property worth at least $250 to vote. Many residents of Seneca Village met this requirement. Property meant voice. By the 1840s, Seneca Village had about 250 residents. Census records from 1855 confirm this number. About 2/3 were black. The rest were Irish immigrants and German immigrants. The village had structure. It had 3 churches. One was African Union Methodist Protestant Church. Another was All Angels Church, which served black and Irish residents. There was also Zion African Methodist Episcopal Church. There was a school for black children. This was rare at the time. Homes varied. Some were wooden, some were stone. Several families owned their houses outright. This challenged the common belief that black New Yorkers were transient. They were not. Residents worked across the city. Some were laborers, some were craftsmen. Some women worked as laundresses or domestic workers. Children attended school or helped at home. The village was quiet. It was distant from crowded downtown streets. Newspapers of the time described the area as rural. Seneca Village was not a slum. City inspection reports did not label it as dangerous or diseased during its active years. This matters. In the 1840s, city leaders began pushing for a large public park. They argued that New York needed open space. They cited health concerns. They pointed to parks in London and Paris. Two men became central to the effort. One was Andrew Jackson Downing, a landscape designer. The other was William Cullen Bryant, editor of the New York Evening Post. They wrote essays. They lobbied officials. They shaped public opinion. Later, Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Voss would design the park. At this stage, they were not yet involved. The question was not whether to build a park. It was where. Several sites were proposed. Lower Manhattan was rejected due to cost. Areas further north were considered too distant. The land that included Seneca Village was chosen in 1853. The New York State Legislature authorized the park that year. The city used eminent domain. This allowed it to seize private property for public use. Compensation was promised. From 1853 to 1857, the city cleared the land. Notices were sent to residents. Many could not read them. Some did not understand their rights. Court records show that property values were set low. Black property owners received less than white owners for similar land. This is documented. Some residents contested the seizures. They lost. Churches were demolished. Homes were torn down. The school closed. By 1857, Seneca Village no longer existed. Once construction began, memory faded fast. Official maps labeled the land as vacant before the park. Reports referred to the area as squatter land. Newspapers repeated this language. This was false. Tax records, census data, and church registries prove stable residents, yet the narrative shifted. The park opened to praise. The displaced were not mentioned. This marked a turning point. The city learned that removal could be justified by rewriting the story. Former residents scattered. Some moved to the west side, some went to Harlem, some left Manhattan. They lost property ownership. They lost voting rights tied to land. They lost community protection. Black home ownership rates in Manhattan declined after the 1850s. This correlation appears in census data. The loss carried forward. During construction, workers found graves. These belonged to village residents. The graves were moved with little record. In the 20th century, historians questioned the old narrative. Archaeological surveys in the 1990s uncovered foundations, household items, and church remains. These findings confirmed written records. Seneca Village was real. The park became a symbol of civic pride. Visitors walked paths without knowing who lived beneath them. The success of Central Park encouraged similar projects. It showed that displacement could be framed as improvement. This lesson would not be forgotten. Long before courthouses rose and streets widened, a dense neighborhood lived where Lower Manhattan now looks official and orderly. This chapter tells the true history of Five Points. It was one of the most discussed places in 19th century New York. It was also one of the most misunderstood. Five Points took its name from a street crossing. 5 streets met at one place. These streets were Anthony Street, Orange Street, Cross Street, Little Water Street, and Mulberry Street. Today, these streets no longer meet in the same way. Some no longer exist under those names. The neighborhood formed in the early 19th century. It grew on land once occupied by the Collect Pond. As told earlier, the pond had been filled badly. The ground remained unstable. Buildings settled unevenly. Water pooled in cellars. This made the area cheap. Cheap housing drew the poor. By the 1830s and 1840s, Five Points became home to thousands. Most residents were Irish immigrants who fled famine and poverty. Many black New Yorkers lived there as well. Some were born free, some were formerly enslaved. Census records from 1840 and 1850 confirm a mixed population. This was unusual at the time. Few neighborhoods in New York were racially integrated. Families lived close together. Tenements held many households. Rooms were small. Air was limited. Sanitation was poor. Life was hard, but it was life. Most residents worked long hours. Men labored on docks, streets, and construction sites. Women took in laundry, cleaned homes, or worked in garment trades. Children worked when possible. Mutual aid mattered. Neighbors shared food. Churches offered support. Informal networks helped families survive illness and job loss. This was not chaos. It was survival under pressure. Newspapers portrayed 5 Points as dangerous. Articles spoke of crime, vice, and disorder. These reports spread fear among middle and upper-class readers. Some crime existed. Records from police courts show theft, assault, and public drunkenness. These crimes were common across the city. What made 5 Points different was attention. Writers visited and reported selectively. They ignored normal life. They focused on extremes. Charles Dickens visited in 1842. He described poverty and filth. His account spread worldwide. It shaped opinion. Dickens did not live there. He passed through. By the 1840s and 1850s, reformers targeted 5 Points. They believed environment caused moral failure. If buildings were removed, behavior would improve. One such reformer was Reverend Louis Pease. He founded the 5 Points Mission in 1850. The mission offered food, education, and religious instruction. Another figure was Jacob Riis, though his work came later in the century. His photographs would later reinforce negative images. Reform mixed care with control. City leaders began to see 5 Points as a problem to solve through removal. Reports labeled the area unfit for habitation. Health boards cited disease risk. Police officials cited disorder. In the 1850s, the city started clearing parts of the neighborhood. Streets were widened, buildings were condemned. The most famous example was the Old Brewery. It stood at the heart of 5 Points. It had once been a brewery. It later became a crowded tenement. Reformers claimed it housed hundreds in misery. In 1852, the building was demolished. This act became symbolic. The demolition of the old brewery did not solve poverty. Residents moved nearby. Crowding shifted rather than ended. Yet the act encouraged more clearance. City officials believed that erasing physical space would erase social problems. This belief guided future actions. The area slowly transformed. Courthouses, police buildings, and offices replaced homes. The people did not return. As 5 Points declined, residents scattered. Irish families moved north to areas such as Hell's Kitchen and the Upper West Side. Black residents faced fewer options. Housing discrimination limited their movement. Integration declined. Segregation increased. Records show a decrease in black residents in Lower Manhattan by the late 19th century. Displacement played a role. The community network dissolved. Despite its reputation, 5 Points produced culture. Music, dance, and slang crossed racial lines there. The area influenced early American popular culture. One example is dance. Irish step dancing and African rhythms met in 5 Points. This interaction shaped tap dance. This development is documented by dance historians. This cultural exchange faded as the neighborhood disappeared. 5 Points showed the city a method: label a place dangerous, publicize its worst moments, remove buildings, replace them with institutions of authority. The public accepted this. They trusted reform language. The cost was unseen. Along the southern edge of Manhattan, a neighborhood once spoke Arabic, prayed in many churches, and sold news from distant homelands. Today, almost nothing marks that place. I am now going to tell the true history of Little Syria. It was a waterfront neighborhood built by immigrants. It disappeared through planning decisions that treated culture as expendable. Little Syria formed in the late 19th century. It stood along Washington Street near Battery Place in Lower Manhattan. The neighborhood stretched roughly from Rector Street to Battery Place. It sat close to docks and shipping offices. The first immigrants arrived from the eastern Mediterranean. Many came from what was then Ottoman Syria. This included present-day Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine. Most arrived between the 1880s and the early 1910s. They came for work. They came to escape political pressure and economic hardship. Steamship records confirm these arrivals. They settled near the port because rent was low and jobs were close. By 1900, Little Syria held several thousand residents. Most were Christian. They included Maronite, Melkite, and Orthodox believers. There were also Muslims and Druze residents. The neighborhood had churches, coffee houses, newspapers, and shops. St. George's Syrian Catholic Church opened in 1892. It still stands today, though the neighborhood around it does not. Arabic language newspapers operated there. One was Kaukab America, founded in 1892. It reached readers across the United States. The neighborhood connected immigrants to home. Residents worked as peddlers, dock workers, factory laborers, and shop owners. Many men sold goods across the city. Many women worked from home sewing or preparing food for sale. Families lived in tenements. Conditions were crowded but stable. Mutual support was strong. New arrivals stayed with relatives. Churches helped with jobs and housing. Children attended local schools. Many learned English quickly. Little Syria was a bridge between worlds. Unlike Five Points, Little Syria was not heavily targeted by newspapers for crime. It was seen as foreign but not dangerous. Visitors described it as lively. Journalists noted the mix of languages and customs. The area appeared in travel writing and ethnographic accounts. This visibility did not protect it. Several figures helped shape the neighborhood. One was Abraham Ribani, a writer and clergyman who lived nearby and wrote about Arab-American life. Another was Amin Rihani, a writer and intellectual who moved between the neighborhood and broader literary circles. These men argued for understanding and inclusion. Their writings remain important records. Local merchants and church leaders held informal power. They organized aid and mediated disputes. They could not stop what came next. In the early 20th century, New York expanded its transportation network. Bridges and tunnels became priorities. Cars and trucks increased. The waterfront gained strategic importance. Plans emerged for the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. Early proposals appeared in the 1920s. Final approval came later. The tunnel required approaches, ventilation buildings, and roadway changes. Washington Street lay directly in the path. City planners viewed the area as expendable. It was old, it was not wealthy, it lacked political influence. Condemnation notices followed. Through the 1930s and 40s, buildings were seized and demolished. Residents received compensation based on property value. Renters received little protection. Churches faced pressure. Businesses closed. Newspapers moved or shut down. Families dispersed. Some moved to Brooklyn. Many went to Atlantic Avenue. Others settled in New Jersey. Little Syria lost density first, then it lost coherence. Finally, it lost its name. The tunnel opened in 1950. The neighborhood was already gone. Displacement fractured networks. Arabic-speaking enclaves survived elsewhere, but the original center vanished. Cultural institutions weakened. Newspapers struggled without a local base. Churches lost members. Arab American identity did not disappear, it changed shape. The loss of Little Syria removed a visible anchor in Manhattan. Later generations grew without a shared physical memory. Little Syria played a national role. It was a center for Arab American publishing. Writers debated politics, religion, and identity there. These debates shaped immigrant thought across the country. The neighborhood also influenced American food culture. Early introductions of Middle Eastern foods occurred there, though they were not widely recognized at the time. Few plaques mark this history today. Little Syria's removal followed a pattern. The city did not accuse it of crime. It did not label it diseased. It simply planned around it. This showed a new method. Neighborhoods could vanish without public conflict. Silence replaced argument. The city learned that visibility did not equal protection. Before music filled concert halls, a living neighborhood filled the air with footsteps, voices, and struggle on Manhattan's West Side. This chapter tells the true history of San Juan Hill. It was a working-class neighborhood. It stood where Lincoln Center now rises. Its removal reshaped culture, race, and power in New York. San Juan Hill formed in the late 19th century. It sat on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. The area stretched roughly from West 59th Street to West 65th Street, between Amsterdam Avenue and West End Avenue. The land developed as the city moved north. Tenements replaced older homes. Rail yards and docks nearby offered work. By the early 20th century, San Juan Hill became one of the largest black neighborhoods in Manhattan. It also included Irish, German, and Puerto Rican residents. This mix created tension. It also created culture. Census data from 1910 and 1920 show a dense population. Many residents were black migrants from the American South. They arrived seeking work and safety from racial violence. Others were Caribbean immigrants. Some were longtime New Yorkers pushed north by earlier displacement. Families lived in walk-up buildings. Apartments were small. Rent was high. Conditions were difficult. The neighborhood endured. Residents worked across the city. Men labored as porters, janitors, dock workers, and service staff. Women worked as domestic workers, laundresses, and factory hands. Churches played a central role. They offered worship, education, and support. Social clubs organized events. Informal networks helped families survive illness and unemployment. Music filled the streets. Ragtime and early jazz thrived. Musicians practiced in homes and halls. San Juan Hill shaped American music history. The name San Juan Hill came into use after the Spanish-American War of 1898. Black soldiers fought at the Battle of San Juan Hill in Cuba. Their bravery gained attention. Residents adopted the name with pride. It marked strength and identity. Outsiders used the name differently. Newspapers tied it to conflict and disorder. The same name carried two meanings. By the 1910s and 1920s, San Juan Hill gained a reputation in the press. Articles emphasized crime and violence. Headlines used fear to attract readers. Police records show crime existed. This was true across the city. Coverage focused heavily on this area. Racial bias shaped reporting. Black neighborhoods were described as threats. White readers absorbed these views. Public opinion hardened.
Local leaders tried to improve conditions. Ministers spoke out. Community organizers pushed for services. Their names appear in church records and local petitions. City power rested elsewhere. Real estate interests saw opportunity. The neighborhood sat near wealthy districts. Land value rose. City planners took note. After World War II, New York embraced urban renewal. Officials believed large-scale rebuilding would solve housing problems. One figure stood at the center of this movement. His name was Robert Moses. He held multiple positions of authority. He shaped roads, parks, and housing projects. Moses viewed San Juan Hill as blighted. He proposed clearance. In the early 1950s, the city approved the Lincoln Square Urban Renewal Project. It included San Juan Hill. The plan called for demolition and rebuilding. Through the 1950s, buildings were condemned. Families received notices. Compensation varied. Renters had few rights. Residents protested. Meetings were held. Petitions circulated. The decisions stood. Thousands were displaced. Estimates range from 7,000 to over 10,000 residents. Records confirm large-scale removal. Bulldozers followed. By the late 1950s, the neighborhood no longer existed. Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts opened in stages beginning in 1959. It was promoted as a gift to the city. It promised culture and beauty. Concert halls rose where homes once stood. The new development did not include the former residents. Public housing projects were built nearby. Many displaced families did not qualify. Others moved to Harlem or the Bronx. The community scattered. The loss of San Juan Hill removed a major black cultural center. Musicians lost local stages. Churches lost members. Social networks broke apart. The Upper West Side changed character. Property values rose. Demographics shifted. The promise of renewal did not include return. Cultural loss did not appear in planning reports. Several famous musicians came from San Juan Hill. One was Thelonious Monk. He spent part of his youth there. His music carried traces of the neighborhood's sound. Another was James P. Johnson, a pioneer of stride piano. He lived and worked in the area. Their success did not save the place that shaped them. Few markers acknowledge this history. San Juan Hill showed how culture could be praised while its source was removed. Music was celebrated. Musicians were displaced. The city learned that art could replace community in public memory. This lesson carried forward. The removal of San Juan Hill proved that renewal could erase living culture while claiming progress. A neighborhood that shaped American music vanished to make room for elite spaces. The sound remained. The streets did not. In the Bronx, a neighborhood once stood whole. Then a road was drawn through its center, and the break never healed. This chapter tells the true history of East Tremont. It was a working-class neighborhood. It did not vanish in silence. It was cut apart. East Tremont lay in the south-central Bronx. It developed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The area filled with apartment houses, shops, schools, and churches. Many residents were Jewish and Italian immigrants. Later, Puerto Rican families moved in. The neighborhood was dense but stable. People lived close to work. Children walked to school. Stores stood on every block. By the 1930s and 1940s, East Tremont was a complete neighborhood. Census records from 1930 and 1940 showed tens of thousands of residents in the surrounding area. Most families were working class. Many relied on small businesses and local jobs. Jewish families ran bakeries, tailors, and groceries. Italian families worked in construction, trades, and services. Puerto Rican families arrived during and after World War II, adding new language and culture. The neighborhood adjusted. It always had.
Life followed a rhythm. Stores opened early. Children played in the streets. Religious life was strong. Synagogues, Catholic churches, and later Pentecostal churches served the community. People knew each other. Neighbors watched children. Credit was extended at local shops. This social fabric mattered. By the 1930s, New York faced traffic growth. Cars and trucks increased. City leaders worried about congestion between New Jersey and Long Island. Plans for a cross-Bronx highway appeared as early as 1929. Engineers debated routes.
Some proposals avoided dense neighborhoods. These alternatives existed. They were rejected. Robert Moses again held power. By the 1940s, he controlled major infrastructure planning. He believed highways were essential to the city's future. Moses chose a route for the Cross-Bronx Expressway that cut directly through East Tremont. He argued it was the most direct path. Community opposition did not change his decision. Construction approval came in the late 1940s. Demolition began soon after. The expressway required a deep trench. Entire blocks had to be removed. From the late 1940s through the 1950s, buildings were condemned. Notices arrived. Appeals were denied. Residents protested. Community groups formed. Letters were sent. Meetings were held. The plan stood. Over 60,000 people were displaced during the construction of the Cross-Bronx Expressway. East Tremont absorbed a heavy share of this loss. Apartment buildings were torn down. Stores closed. Streets ended at fences. Families were offered relocation. Many were sent to public housing far from their original homes. Others moved wherever they could find space. The neighborhood did not move together. It fractured. Noise filled the area. Dust settled on remaining buildings. Streets that once connected became dead ends. Businesses that depended on foot traffic failed. Schools lost students. Churches lost congregations. The expressway opened in stages between 1955 and 1963. By then, East Tremont was no longer whole. Displacement changed the Bronx. Many families left the borough entirely. Those who stayed faced declining services and investment. The expressway created physical division. It also created social separation. Urban planners later acknowledged damage. At the time, these costs were accepted. East Tremont never recovered its original form. Alternative routes were proposed that would have displaced fewer residents. Internal documents show these options were dismissed due to cost and speed. Some buildings survived only feet from the expressway trench. Residents lived with constant noise and pollution. Health effects were not studied at the time. The focus remained on traffic flow. East Tremont showed the final stage of a long process. Neighborhoods were no longer removed entirely, they were sliced apart. The result was lasting damage. The city had perfected its tools. The Cross-Bronx Expressway did not just move cars, it moved people out of place. It broke a neighborhood that had endured waves of change. Progress passed through. Community paid the price. Before the Bronx was a borough, before numbered streets and elevated trains, a village stood on its own land and governed itself. Do you know the story of Morrisania? It was not destroyed by fire or force. It disappeared through law, absorption, and neglect. Its loss shows how a place can vanish without a single building falling at once. Morrisania began in the mid-18th century. The land belonged to the Morris family, one of the most powerful families in colonial New York. Gouverneur Morris, a founding father, was born nearby in 1752. The village developed slowly. By the early 19th century, Morrisania had farms, homes, churches, and small businesses. It sat in what is now the South Bronx, east of the Harlem River. It was independent.
Morrisania was part of Westchester County, not New York City. It had its own local government and identity. By the mid-1800s, Morrisania housed a mixed population. There were farmers, tradesmen, laborers, and shopkeepers. Irish and German immigrants settled there alongside older families. Homes ranged from farmhouses to modest wood-frame buildings. Life was quieter than in Manhattan. Land was cheaper. Space was wider. Residents chose Morrisania to avoid crowding. People worked locally or commuted by ferry and later by rail. Markets sold produce grown nearby. Churches anchored community life. Schools served local children. The village followed a rural rhythm. Roads curved. Property lines followed natural features. This way of life lasted decades. By the mid-19th century, New York City faced limits. Manhattan was crowded. Growth pushed outward. City leaders looked north. The Harlem River separated Manhattan from the villages of southern Westchester County. These villages included Morrisania, West Farms, and Kingsbridge. Business leaders wanted control of land and infrastructure. City officials wanted tax revenue. The villages stood in the way. In 1874, New York State approved the annexation of parts of Westchester County into New York City. Morrisania was included. Residents opposed annexation. Records show petitions and public meetings. Many feared higher taxes and loss of local control. Their objections failed. Morrisania became part of New York City overnight. Village government dissolved. City laws replaced local rules. Streets were renamed. Property assessments rose. The grid system advanced. Curved roads were straightened or erased. Farmland was divided into lots. Developers moved in. This change did not feel dramatic at first. It unfolded year by year. That made it harder to resist. By the late 19th century, rail lines reached the area. Elevated trains followed. Tenements replaced houses. Population increased rapidly. Census data from 1890 and 2000 show sharp growth. The village character faded. By the early 20th century, Morrisania existed only as a neighborhood name. Its earlier identity was gone. Longtime residents faced pressure to sell. Taxes rose beyond what farmers could pay. Many left. New residents arrived with fewer resources. Housing crowded quickly. Infrastructure lagged behind growth. Problems followed: overcrowding, poor sanitation, limited services. The original village did not adapt. It was replaced. Some buildings from old Morrisania survived into the 20th century, hidden among newer structures. A few churches traced their roots to the village era. The Morris family name remained on maps, but the place it described no longer existed. Annexation was framed as progress. The loss of local identity was rarely mentioned. Morrisania's disappearance completed a pattern seen across the city. Some neighborhoods were cleared quickly. Some were absorbed slowly. Both outcomes led to the same end. The people who built these places lost control over their future. Morrisania did not fall in a single moment. It faded through legal action and economic pressure. This made its loss easy to overlook. Yet the result was total. A village became a memory. A name remained without meaning. This quiet ending showed the final form of erasure. Across New York, lost neighborhoods shared a fate. Some were cleared for parks. Some were crushed by roads. Some were absorbed by growth. Each loss carried human cost. Maps changed. Lives shifted. Memory weakened. The city moved forward. The ground beneath it holds the rest.